welcome to my channel, and the subject of this video will be 2026 minus 50, my favourite 10 albums from 1976. (1976), the year which saw the Montreal Olympics, the US bicentennial, and Jimmy Carter being elected their president. In the UK, James Callaghan became Prime Minister after Harold Wilson's resignation. Southampton beat Manchester United to win the FA Cup, and a summer-long heatwave led to a drought that came to an abrupt and very wet end. On a personal level, I reached my teens and started doing a paper round to earn a little money. Musically in the UK, things could be pretty dire. The album charts were dominated by greatest hits and best of albums. They held the number one spot for no less than 37 weeks. The singles charts weren't much better, with the absolute nadir being Combine Harvester by the Wurzels reaching number one. Disco was growing in popularity, but more radical change was in the air, although too late to make a notable impact on the charts in 1976. Therefore, my favourite 10 albums here are a mix of what I liked at the time, what I grew to like in the next few years, or in a couple of cases, much later on. 10th is Agents of Fortune by Blue Oyster Cult. Agents of Fortune was their fourth studio album, and if you've heard the previous three, then the more polished sound stands out a mile. It contains Don't Fear the Reaper, the track Blue Oyster Cult are probably best known for. A rock classic without a doubt, but there's a lot more on this album to make it among their most solid, with one exception which I'll get to in a mo. It Ain't the Summer of Love kicks things off very well, and others of note are ETI, The Revenge of Vera Gemini, Tattoo Vampire, and Morning Final. Via keyboard player and rhythm guitarist Alan Lanier, the band had a connection with Patti Smith, who for this album wrote the lyrics for The Revenge of Vera Gemini and Debbie Denise. The latter track is the exception I mentioned. It gives the album a real damp squib of a finish, but for that, Agents of Fortune would have been in my top 5. A track on the CD version is an early recording of Fire of Unknown Origin, which may be of interest to the band's longer-standing fans. 9th is Flow Motion by Can. Not only did the single from this album, I Want More, receive quite a bit of airplay on BBC Radio 1, the band made an appearance on Top of the Pops to promote it as well. Eventually reaching number 28, it gave Can their solitary UK hit, and I'm proud to say that I helped it reach that lofty position. It's a quirky little song which opens the album, and although it doesn't set the tone for the overall sound, Flow Motion, I'd say, is Can's most accessible album as an easy entry point to explore their discography. It's not my favourite album by Can, but it does have a nice flow to it, if you excuse the pun. The first 5 tracks move along at a fairly relaxed pace. Cascade Waltz, Babylonian Pearl, and the reggae-tinged Laugh Till You Cry, Live Till You Die, ORN, provide some rhythmic variety. The chant-like song and more could be described as I Want More Part 2. The final 2 tracks are Smoke EFS number 59 and the title track. The tribal drumming on Smoke is a reminder of Jackie Liebezeit's talent, and on the 10-minute plus title track, it's back to shades of reggae, albeit with more atmospheric keyboard texture and greater guitar improvisation. 8th is the third Rock and Roll by The Residents. This is an album I wouldn't have been able to make head nor tail of in 1976, nor for a while after. However, perception can change over the passage of time, and the third Rock and Roll is now an album I've got a lot of time for. It has 2 tracks consisting mostly of a dismembered, distorted, mashed up array of popular pop and rock tunes from the previous 15 years or so. Side 1's Swastikas on Parade starts with a German accented take of The Twist, before the likes of A Horse with No Name, Telstar, Wipeout, and Gloria get merged in together with additional sound effects and some crazed free jazz saxophone. The Residents' versions of the songs are so warped it's difficult to tell where things start, end, or overlap. But on side two's Hitler Was a Vegetarian, things are less merged and, for the Residents, more conventional. 96 Tears, Inagada Davida, Hey Jude, and Light My Fire are among those played in such a way that they could quite easily fit into the circus scene of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Madness or Genius? I'll go for Genius. Seventh is Still Life by Van der Graaf Generator. When I first started listening to prog, it was the usual suspects: Pink Floyd, Genesis, Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Van der Graaf Generator I'd heard, but I just didn't get it. Nowadays, they've overtaken most of those others in what I feel about prog from the 70s. Partly that's because of Peter Hamill's expressive style, which makes him a compelling singer. He could be delicate and tuneful, but equally capable of spitting and snarling. With La Rosa on this album, you get all of that to full effect. It's a stunner of a track. Not that this album is all about Hamill. Hugh Banton on keyboards, David Jackson on saxophone, and Guy Evans on drums provide an excellent canvas over which Hamill could work his magic. The album begins well with Pilgrims using a familiar prog technique of slow and quiet parts with alternating rhythmic and louder ones. The title track is similar. Hamill's lyrics are a kind of existential crisis. My Room, Waiting for Wonderland opens side two in relatively restrained fashion. Childlike Faith in Childhood's End is the final track and the album's longest, and a fine conclusion. After Pawn Hearts, it's my second favourite album by Van der Graaf Generator. Sixth is Saab Stories by the sensational Alex Harvey Band. In comparison to some of their other albums, Saab Stories doesn't contain many heavily riffed tracks. Neither are there ones with the kinds of twists and turns found in earlier songs like Isabel Gaudi, Last of the Teenage Idols, or The Tale of the Giant Stone Eater. However, being one of the first albums I bought, I have a certain degree of bias towards it. Boston Tea Party, with its catchy chorus, was a hit in the UK singles charts, and with that came an appearance on Top of the Pops. Other tracks I like are Dogs of War, Amos Moses, Sirocco, and Jungle Rub Out. The rest are also decent, but it is fair to say that Saab Stories isn't the band's finest moment. As I said, though, I'm biased and can live with its shortcomings. Before I go any further, here's a glimpse of what's in the planning stages for this channel. Fifth is Stratosphere by Tangerine Dream. This album I think of as a good entry point for the curious. Just 4 tracks, and in contrast to earlier albums, quite an array of instruments are used. As well as the familiar usage of synths and sequencers, there's also a fair bit of guitar, harpsichord is used on one track, and mouth organ on another. The title track starts the album where the melody is quite intricate for Tangerine Dream. The Big Sleep in Search of Hades, the track with the harpsichord, and 3 a.m. at the Border of the Marsh from Okefenokee, the track with the mouth organ, are both atmospheric in a more down-to-earth way than some of their earlier spacey work. Final track, Invisible Limits, is varied in that it contains the most guitar, plus the album's only truly experimental section. And that's not for long. Stratosphere is one of my favourites by Tangerine Dream, and one where the band were maybe making a pitch for doing film soundtrack work, which in due course they did. In fourth is Alas of Sunhillow by John Anderson. After touring in 1975 to promote the Relayer album, Yes went on a temporary hiatus which allowed the individual members to work on solo albums. Lies of Sun Hilo is the pick of them for me. In a nutshell, it's a concept album about the departure from a dying world by a race whose music has a quasi-religious or ritualistic dimension. So you could say there's a transcendental allegory going on here. Getting on to the music though, the album combines prog, psyche-folk, aspects of world music and electronics. The world music type rhythms and the use of percussion especially are aspects that float my boat. The electronics also, and they're a departure from what you'd previously got with Yes. In 1975, Anderson had contributed to Vangelis's album Heaven and Hell, and it seems to me that that experience fed into the approach used on Elias of Sun Hilo. It was possibly a tall order to combine so many different styles, but I think John Anderson made it work extremely well. In third, it's Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy. In North America, I suspect Agents of Fortune by Blue Oyster Cult is the most well-known album among my selections, but on this side of the Atlantic, it would almost certainly be Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy. It's an album that propelled a middling sort of band firmly into the spotlight and gave them a following that would stick by them until their eventual end. Having a hit single always helps, and The Boys Are Back in Town remains to this day a memorable one. The album combines out-and-out rockers like The Boys Are Back in Town, Warriors, the title track, and the album's big finish, Emerald. Surrounding those are tracks where the band showed the depth of their songwriting ability. There's not a duff one to be found. The comic book-inspired gatefold cover art by Jim Fitzpatrick is also high quality, with a Neil Adams-esque front cover revealing a kind of George Perez or Sal Buscema type action drawing on the inside. A 10 out of 10 album in every department. In second, it's Tales of Mystery and Imagination, Edgar Allan Poe by the Alan Parsons Project. Prior to co-founding the Alan Parsons Project with Eric Wolfson, Parsons was probably best known as an engineer on Dark Side of the Moon, as well as being a producer who had worked with the likes of Pilot, Cockney Rebel, Al Stewart and John Miles. Clearly he used his connections to help pull this album together, as John Miles and a few members of Pilot contribute, as well as the likes of Francis Monkman and Arthur Brown. Like the title suggests, this album is a homage to the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and musically it's at the pop end of prog rock, with more emphasis on hooks than virtuosity. Arthur Brown's typically dramatic performance on The Telltale Heart is a real highlight. The lengthy instrumental The Fall of the House of Usher combines prog and classical, including a dissonant ending. In my early teens, it was a track I wasn't really equipped to fully appreciate, but now I think it's great. As well as superb songs, what seals the deal to make this my second favourite album of 1976 are the narrated passages by Orson Welles at the start of each side, which serve as a brilliant setup for what's to follow. And in first, it's How Dare You by 10cc. This turned out to be the last hurrah for the classic lineup of Eric Stewart, Graham Gouldman, Kevin Godley and Lowell Cream, after which Godley and Cream left and were a successful pairing musically and in video direction. The album opens nicely with the instrumental title track, which was a little unusual in that I think it's their only album to have a title track. How Dare You leads into Lazy Ways, one of my favourites on the album. Well, I say one of my favourites, but in actual fact I like all 9 of them. The album spawned 2 hit singles in the UK, Art for Art's Sake and the superb I'm Mandy Fly Me. For a single, I'm Mandy Fly Me has quite an elaborate arrangement, but there was a market for that kind of approach given that Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen and music by John Miles had also been successful not long before. I love the way it begins, using a section from the track Clockwork Creep off of their earlier album Sheet Music. Final track Don't Hang Up is also elaborate and contains really clever wordplay in the lyrics. A shame that Godley and Cream left, but they did so on a high point, having been major songwriting contributors on the band's 4 studio albums up to and including How Dare You. And that's 1976. There are a lot of other famous albums that aren't in my list for sure. Chances are I don't have them, and I only ever include items that I own. On the whole, I'd say 1976 was patchy, suffering from too much record company control and lack of vision. Artists in more well established genres seem to be doing the same old thing, just with better production. In the case of prog rock, it was losing the right to be considered as progressive in a lot of cases. A bit harsh, maybe, but it definitely wasn't engaging too well with younger people branching out from pop music for the first time, as time would tell. There is a playlist of tracks from each of the albums in my list, and as per usual, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Your perseverance is much appreciated.